Hello and good afternoon, investors. Today we will be discussing the values and cons of investing your business in Singapore. Today my group is a group that is brought in by the Singapore government to outsource business and employees into Singapore and bring businesses into Singapore. My name is Dylan Stonecipher. I'm an economist focusing on the four Asian tigers, and I will be focusing on the economy of Singapore. After me, we have Nasser Al-Asumi, who will be discussing imports and exports. Kanya Maliwan, who will be discussing the culture of Singapore. Adrian Villarreal, who will discuss the structure of setting up a business in Singapore. Sarah Bodie, who will be discussing infrastructure, such as transportation and communication. And Rosendo Villarreal, who will be discussing the government's role in bringing your business to Singapore. To start out, I will be discussing the economy. So Singapore's economy is one of the most open and thus competitive economies in the world, according to economywatch.com. It is heavily based in the service industry, not so much in agriculture or industrial, and it's incredibly easy for investors and business people alike to get involved in Singapore's industry. The GDP is $339 billion. It's ranked 41 in the world. While at first that seems a little not so good when you think about it, Singapore is essentially one city, and that city ranks number 41 in the world in GDP of countries. That means it's ranked higher than many Eastern European and other South Asian countries. The GDP per capita is $62,400. That is 7th in the world, which contributes to the people having a lot of excess money to spend, which can really aid your business if you're there because they have the money to use on you. The labor force, as I said, is 80% service industry based. So a lot of your businesses involving trading and that kind of stuff come through Singapore. And the inflation rate, while we're at it, is relatively low. It's 2.4%, which is 88th highest in the world. Not a bad number. This is actually a chart from the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business rankings, and it puts Singapore as number 1 in the Ease of Doing Business rankings in terms of economy. You can also see that they rank in the top 10 in all but 2 of these categories, which include dealing with construction permits, getting electricity, that kind of stuff. For comparison, you can look at the United States, which is number 4, but across all the categories ranks as low as 64 in some of them. So now we'll be discussing whether or not it's worth it to invest. The pros are it is a service-based industry. It's very easy to get into. It is number 1 in the ease of doing business according to the World Bank. It has high GDP per capita and as a whole, so it's got a lot of excess spending money for your business. And it's just easy to get involved in as it is an international hub for business. There are some downfalls. It's limited in its industrial economy. There is no industry really and no agriculture. And it's small scale, so you can work your way up quick, but it's not as big as it would be in, for instance, China or somewhere else. But seeing as this is an international hub for business, it is really easy to expand from Singapore. So value investment on an economic standpoint, I would say is high. Now we're going to go to Nasser Al-Asumi, who will talk about exports and imports.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Nasser, and I own a travel agency in Singapore after working in the Ministry of Industry and Trade in Singapore. I'll be talking about Singapore's market, which will include tourism, imports and exports. In 2012, Singapore reached a high record of 14.5 million tourists, and it is more than twice the population of the country. The reason behind that is that according to Forbes, Singapore is considered the world's lowest crime rate, has the world's lowest crime rate. There are 4 languages spoken in Singapore, and English is the dominant one, which makes it easier for tourists to communicate with local people. The tourism receipts is also reached a record high of $23.1 billion. The Singapore Tourism Board aimed to triple the tourism receipts to $30 billion and to double visitors to 17 million visitors by 2015. And they are working closely with international investors to develop new world-class attractions. And currently they are working on 7 major attractions, and it will be end in 2015. Exports and imports are considered an important factor in the Singaporean's economy, since it is the 14th largest exporter and the 15th largest importer in the world. It has the highest trade to GDP ratio according to the World Trade Organization. The primary exports include electronics and machinery, and the total value of exports is $351.2 billion. And the primary imports are food products, and the total value of imports is $310.4 billion. I have talked about tourism in Singapore and how it is a major industry for the economy, and I talked about the importance of imports and exports and how they play a big role in the economy. Now I'll hand it to Kanya to talk about the culture and demographics.
Thank you, Nasser. Hello, my name is Kanya, and I'm a small business owner and inhabitant of Singapore for about 3 years now. Today I will be discussing Singapore's culture by discussing its demographics, language, and business etiquette. To start off, according to quintessential.com, Singapore is comprised of 3 main ethnic groups that make up the majority of its population. Singapore is known as the land of immigrants because it's a very diverse country. The greatest ethnic group in Singapore is the Chinese, who make up about 74% of the Singapore's population. Following them is the Singapore Malay, who make up about 14%, and the third greatest ethnic group in Singapore are Indians, who make up about 8%. Per yoursingapore.com, Singapore actually holds the greatest overseas population of Indians. Now, what makes Singapore unique is that the 3 different unique cultures all celebrate their cultures very prominently, but live in mutual respect with one another. Because of the diversity, the government has tried to establish foreign identity by naming 4 different national languages, as Nasser mentioned, which are Mandarin, Malay, Tamil, and English. However, English is the preferred language for business. So going off of that, my second point will be discussing business etiquette. 2 of the most important concepts to understand well to develop relationships of any type in Singapore are knowing face and hierarchy. According to an article found on internationalman.com, face means having respect for yourself and for others, as well as a feeling of self-importance and worth. But along with that, face also means trying to prevent any type of embarrassment or failure. So on the other side, losing face is one of the most detrimental things you can do for a relationship or somebody's status, which would include chewing gum, being disrespectful, and on a business situation, not being calm in a meeting. So the other important factor is understanding hierarchy. When you're first being introduced in business meetings or something like that, the oldest person or the person with the highest status is always introduced first. Rank is very respected in Singapore, so keep in mind, as I said, when you should always wait to be seated because the person who's the eldest or the greatest status is always seated first. Now for business etiquette. Along with business etiquette, understanding honorable communication is very important. It can also be more important than verbal communication. So you must keep in mind your facial expressions, tone, and the manner of silence. Silence in Singapore denotes respect. So when you question somebody, they are usually silent for typically about 15 seconds, so they can provide you intelligent feedback and honest feedback for your questions. So in order to create a personal and business-like relationship, you must follow Singapore's strict and formal codes for business etiquette, because, for example, the concept of family carries over to business, because a group or the company is seen as more important as an individual. Another thing I find interesting about business etiquette in Singapore are how they take business cards. Business cards you should treat as you would treat a relationship. They should always be kept in pristine condition, and if you hand out business cards that are tattered or worn out, you definitely lose face for that. So now that you know a little bit about Singapore's culture with their demographics, language, and business etiquette, I can hand it off to Adrian to discuss how to actually start up your business and about taxation.
Thank you, Connie. Hello, I'm Adrian Villarreal. I'm a financial advisor for companies wishing to expand globally. So I'll be talking to you a little bit today about how you go about setting up a business in Hong Kong and their taxation rate a little bit as well. According to enterpriseone.gov, which is a government help site for businesses, they recommend that before you even think about incorporating, that you first see if your name is available on the ACRA's online directory, which is the Accounting and Corporate Regulatory Authority in Singapore. They want you to find your SSIC code and want you to determine your business structure beforehand if you're a corporation or an LLC. Along with, you can actually, as a foreigner, register a company there. So if you want to self-register, you have to apply for a SingPass account, which is a Singapore Personal Access account, or use a firm as most people do. But as far as actual incorporation requirements, they require that you have an address in Singapore, specifically for the business, as well as if you wish to live in Singapore while operating the business, you have to apply for an EntrePass, which is Entrepreneur Pass, something a part of their business philosophy that lets you live there easily. You have to have one director that's over 18 or is a Singapore citizen, permanent resident, or you have an EntrePass. You have to have one shareholder and a maximum of 50 shareholders. That one shareholder can be both the shareholder and director though. And you also have to hire a secretary within 6 months of incorporation in Singapore. Now, as far as the actual registration goes, you register with the Accounting and Corporate Regulatory Authority, their online system called BizFile. You register your company name, and then you register the actual incorporation papers. And unless you require specific government approval, the application takes about 15 minutes, and then you're a registered entity in Singapore. And the total registration cost is around $252 US. As far as taxation goes, it's one of the best tax zones in the entire world for business. Your first $80,000 annual profit is tax exempt the first 3 years of business. And then the next $160,000 US is taxed at 8.5%, along with anything above $240,000 US is taxed at then a flat rate of 17%. So today I talked to you a little bit about the process of incorporation and the taxation rates that the country imposes as one of the best tax rated countries in the world. I'm going to pass it on to Sarah now, who will talk about the infrastructure of the country.
Hello, my name is Sarah Bodie. I'm an infrastructure consultant for startup businesses. And today I will be talking about different types of infrastructure such as transportation and communication. According to prweb.com, Singapore's infrastructure was ranked one of the best among the top cities in the world. And to start with transportation, we'll start with the mode of airplane. The Singapore-Shanghai International Airport is the hub for one of the most efficient airports in the world. According to yoursingapore.com, they have 100 different airlines that link together 57 million passengers a year. That means that on an average, every 90 seconds, a plane will take off. As Nasser mentioned, seaports for their imports and exports are very important in Singapore. Therefore, their seaports have around 400 different shipping lines that travel all the way to 700 ports worldwide. They are also one out of the 3 largest ports in the world, according to the Singapore German Chamber. Other more common sources of transportation are the Mass Rapid Transport, also known as the MRT, and the Light Rapid Transport, also known as the LRT. These are long-term infrastructure projects that will help get people around the city very easily and efficiently. There are currently 3 light rapid transports right now, and the 5th mass rapid transport is under construction, according to the Singapore German Chamber. They are known to be the cleanest and most efficient modes of transportation in Singapore. They also offer scenic views as you travel on them, and they accommodate to nearly every disability, or if you have large items while traveling, as there are many tourists there, that they accommodate to that. Another common form of transportation are taxis and buses. The SBS Transit is Singapore's main bus service. And according to taxisingapore.com, there are nearly 25,000 taxis that travel around every day. You also have the customization to choose from a range of luxurious vehicles for you to be picked up in. Moving on to communication. As mentioned earlier, there are 4 major languages: Malay, Chinese Mandarin, Tamil, and English, English being the most common language. There is easy way to communicate through the internet, as according to Bloomberg, Singapore got ranked in one of the fastest cities with the fastest internet, and they are known as the tech hub for their fastest internet. They also have something called undersea cable. It is underwater sources of cable that connect from Europe and Singapore and various points in between. They currently have 15 different cable systems that are underwater, according to CNET.com. So today I covered the different modes of transportation, such as airplane, seaport, the mass rapid transport, and taxis and buses, and also different sources of communication that will be efficient for your businesses. I will pass it off to Rosendo, who will talk to you about the government.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rosendo Villarreal. I'm an investment assessor in Singapore. I help the government of Singapore to help with foreign investments. And what I do is, for the legal things, I help them. According with the Constitution, there's the executive, the legislative, and judicial. And the executive is made by the president, the legislative is the parliament, and judicial is part of the whole government. In the executive, the president is go with the prime minister, that is go by its side, and it decides the parliament. Legislative is made by the parliament, and judicial is the one that makes the health justice. The government, Singapore has been a sovereign republic since 1965, when the People's Action Party became in power, occupying the 82 seats out of 84 seats. It also becomes a socialist democracy. Because Singapore is made of bureaucrats, the government is conformed by bureaucrats, the power is gained by skill, performance, loyalty to nation, and this creates Singapore a very good country to invest. As foreign policy, it is to aim to maintain friendly relations with every country, especially Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. The Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation is based in Singapore. It began when creating the Free Trade Agreement in 2006 when Obama came there. Some of the fundamental principles of Singapore foreign policy are that they are good friends, they want to make good relationships, and to have a very good military force to prevent any conflicts. So today I talk about the government of Singapore, the government structure, and the foreign policies. And all this aims to Singapore to become one of the countries where it's easier to make business in. I'm going to pass it to Dylan.
So in conclusion, today we have discussed with myself the economic values of putting a business in Singapore, including the high concentration of GDP and GDP per capita. After myself, Nasser talked about how tourism greatly affects the businesses in Singapore. Kanya discussed saving face and the cultural aspects of business interactions in Singapore. Adrian discussed how to go about setting up your business in Singapore. Sarah discussed the infrastructure, including transportation and communication from Singapore. And Rosendo discussed the government and foreign policy of Singapore. Thank you guys for listening, and do you have any questions?